Kindness can cost us. Sometimes it humiliates us in front of others. But sometimes, kindness calls forward protectors we never expected. This is the story of Daniel, a single father who gave up his seat in a small-town diner. What followed brought him shame until AFFA changed everything. Before we start into today's story, let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And if our stories touch your heart, please subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers and bring you more inspiring stories every week. Daniel pushed open the glass door of Miller's diner, the bell above jingling. His 8-year-old son, Jacob, shuffled beside him, clutching a toy truck. Money was scarce, but Saturday mornings were their ritual. One plate of pancakes to share, laughter echoing in a place that felt almost like home. That morning, the diner buzzed with voices. Farmers, mechanics, and a couple of bikers hunched at the counter. Only one booth remained by the window. Daniel ushered Jacob into it, relief settling in. Then the door opened again. A road-worn rider stepped in, beard untrimmed, helmet tucked under his arm, eyes heavy with fatigue. He scanned the packed room, clearly searching for a place to sit. Daniel glanced at Jacob, then at the man. With a quiet sigh he stood. "Sir, you can have our booth. We'll wait." The rider hesitated, surprised. Then he nodded, grateful, sliding into the seat. Daniel and Jacob stood by the wall. A kind gesture, simple and human. But kindness sometimes paints a target. From the corner, mocking voices stirred. At a corner table, 3 young men watched the exchange with smirks. Caps backward, boots propped on chairs, they radiated trouble. One leaned close to his friend and said loudly enough for half the diner to hear, "Look at the charity case. Can't even keep a booth for his own kid." Daniel stiffened. Jacob blinked up at him. "Dad? What did he mean?" "Nothing," Daniel muttered, keeping his gaze low. But the whispers grew louder. Another of the men snickered. "Probably can't afford breakfast anyway. Bet the kid gets half a pancake." Jacob's small fingers tightened around his toy truck. Daniel's jaw clenched. He wanted to fire back, but his son's wide eyes kept him still. The rider in the booth overheard. His shoulders tensed. He looked at Daniel, then at the group. Something unspoken flickered in his eyes. The laughter wasn't innocent anymore. It was growing into humiliation. A few customers chuckled nervously, while others turned away, unwilling to interfere. And then, the atmosphere shifted. The bell above the diner door rang again, and the sound of heavy boots echoed across the floor. The diner fell silent. Conversations froze as 5 bikers entered, leather vests marked with the red and white patch, Hell's Angels. The letters AFFA burned bold across their backs. Angels forever, forever angels. The air thickened. The 3 young men at the corner table straightened, their smirks faltering. The waitress, Patty, gripped her order pad tighter, eyes darting nervously. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen bikers before, but never this close. They carried a presence like a storm, loud, unspoken, commanding respect. The angels didn't immediately sit. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with steel-gray hair and sunglasses still on indoors, scanned the room. His gaze landed on Daniel and Jacob standing by the wall, then drifted to the rider in the booth, then finally settled on the table of mocking men. Silence stretched. The ticking of the diner's old clock was the only sound. The leader's jaw tightened. He motioned for his brothers to sit at the counter, but his eyes never left the corner table. Daniel swallowed hard, sensing the tension coil tighter. Something was about to give. The 3 men at the corner tried to recover their bravado. One raised his voice, loud enough for the angels to hear. "Guess anyone can play hero these days. Even broke dads." He chuckled, but his laughter was hollow. Jacob shrank against Daniel's leg, eyes watering. Daniel bent down, whispering, "Ignore them, son. but his own hands trembled. The writer in the booth finally spoke, voice low, rough. "You boys got something better to do than humiliate a man in front of his kid?" The diner stilled again. The bullies sneered. "What's it to you, old man?" That's when the angels moved. Not fast, not loud. Just deliberate. The gray-haired leader rose from his stool, boots thudding across the floor. His vest gleamed under the neon lights, patches stitched like scars of respect. He stopped at the corner table, towering above the three. His voice was calm, but carried steel. "You mocking him?" No one breathed. The tension was a wire ready to snap. The leader's shadow stretched across the table. One of the young men smirked weakly. "Just joking around. No harm meant." The angel leaned down, sunglasses reflecting the man's pale face. "Humiliation isn't a joke, especially not in front of a kid." His voice was steady, but every word carried weight. The diner's air felt electric. Jacob buried his face in Daniel's side, but Daniel couldn't look away. The second bully muttered, "What's it to you, old man? He ain't your problem." That was the wrong thing to say. The angel slammed his palm flat against their table, rattling glasses and silverware. His brothers stood instantly, chairs screeching. The whole diner seemed to shake. "Every man who raises a child alone is my problem," the leader growled. "You don't mock that. You respect it." The bullies fell silent, bravado drained. The leader straightened, gaze shifting briefly to Daniel. He gave a small nod, almost imperceptible but full of meaning. For the first time, Daniel felt seen, not as a failure but as a father doing his best. The confrontation was only beginning. The diner was so quiet you could hear the fizz of a soda machine. Every eye was locked on the corner table. The three bullies, once loud and cocky, now stared at their plates, hands trembling just enough to betray them. Daniel stood frozen, Jacob clinging tightly to his shirt. A swirl of emotions rose in his chest. Fear, relief, disbelief. The leader of the angels let the silence stretch, making sure his words had sunk deep. Then he spoke again, softer this time, but no less commanding. "Men who mock fathers don't understand what strength looks like." He glanced briefly at Daniel. "It takes guts to raise a child. Alone." Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't heard words like that in years. Not since before his wife passed. He swallowed hard, tears threatening. The waitress, Patty, broke the silence nervously. "Coffee, gentlemen?" The angel leader nodded, finally returning to the counter. The storm seemed to pass, but its weight lingered in the room. The bullies muttered apologies no one believed. Their arrogance was broken. But for Daniel, something deeper stirred. He had expected shame. Instead, he felt dignity returning, like a spark rekindled. When the angels settled at the counter, the tension in the diner loosened just slightly. Plates clinked again, murmurs rose, but the air never returned to normal. Jacob tugged at Daniel's sleeve, whispering, "Dad, why did they help us?" Daniel knelt beside him, searching for words. He didn't want to glorify fear or intimidation, but he also couldn't deny what had just happened. He brushed Jacob's hair back gently. "Because sometimes, the people you least expect stand up for what's right." Jacob's brow furrowed. "Like superheroes?" Daniel smiled faintly through the ache in his chest. "Something like that." Across the diner, the writer who had taken their booth caught Daniel's eye. He nodded once. An unspoken thank you for the seat, and respect for the storm Daniel had endured. The three bullies paid quickly and slipped out the door, their arrogance left behind in crumbs and coffee stains. But the angels stayed, watching, silent guardians. For Daniel, it wasn't just about being defended, it was about Jacob witnessing it. His son had seen that kindness wasn't weakness, and dignity could be restored by unexpected hands. Patty walked nervously to Daniel, setting a plate of pancakes before Jacob. "On the house," she whispered, squeezing Daniel's shoulder. "For both of you." Daniel's eyes widened. He opened his mouth to protest, but she shook her head firmly. "You've had enough taken from you today." As Jacob dug into his food, Daniel glanced toward the counter. The angels sat in silence, drinking black coffee. Then, almost casually, the leader slipped a folded bill under his mug. Patty picked it up and gasped softly. It was more than enough to cover not only their own meal but Daniel's as well. Daniel rose, jacket still hanging loosely on his shoulders, and approached the counter. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. The leader turned slightly, lowering his sunglasses just enough for Daniel to see his eyes. Tired, weathered, but kind. "You gave up your seat for a brother. We take care of family." Daniel didn't understand all the words, but the weight of them pressed into his heart. He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Thank you," he whispered. The angel leader just gave a slow nod in return. The morning had shifted. What began as humiliation now felt like something else, something bigger than Daniel could name. Outside, the sun had risen higher, spilling gold across the diner's gravel lot. The angels mounted their bikes one by one, engines rumbling like distant thunder. Daniel and Jacob stepped outside too, shielding their eyes against the light. The leader paused by his Harley, looking back at them. Jacob clutched his father's hand tighter, whispering, "Dad, they're leaving." Daniel nodded. "Yes, but they already gave us more than we could ask for." The leader reached into his vest and pulled out a small, grease-stained card. He walked to Daniel, pressing it into his palm. "If anyone ever gives you trouble again, call this number. You're not alone." Daniel stared at the card, stunned. Before he could reply, the man swung onto his bike, revved the engine, and led the pack away, the sound shaking the ground. Jacob whispered in awe, "Dad, they protected us." Daniel knelt to meet his son's eyes. "Yes, and that means we always stand tall, no matter what." Days passed, but Daniel couldn't stop thinking about that morning. His old pickup, held together by duct tape and prayer, broke down 2 nights later outside his job. He sat on the curb, Jacob asleep in the cab, wondering how much longer he could carry the weight of survival. Then headlights swept the street. Engines roared, not one but many. The angels. The leader pulled up, same steel-gray hair catching the moonlight. He stepped off his bike, motioning toward a gleaming truck that followed behind. Its paint shone, chrome glinting like fire. Daniel blinked, stunned. "What is this?" The leader's voice was calm, steady. "You stood up with dignity when the world tried to shame you. You cared more for your son than for yourself. That deserves respect." Daniel shook his head, overwhelmed. I can't accept this." The leader's eyes hardened gently. "It's not a gift. It's brotherhood. When one of us struggles, we all rise. AFFA. Tears blurred Daniel's vision. He hugged Jacob close, heart pounding with gratitude. That night, for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel small. He felt seen, protected, carried. The next morning, Daniel stood in his driveway staring at the truck. It still felt unreal. The shine of its paint, the smooth leather seats, the engine that purred instead of coughed. Jacob darted around it in excitement, his laughter ringing across the street. Neighbors peeked from porches, whispering. Some shook their heads, some smiled, but Daniel ignored them. For once, the eyes of others didn't matter. He opened the driver's door slowly, running his fingers across the steering wheel. It wasn't about the metal, the horsepower, or the shine. It was what it meant. Someone believed he was worth investing in. When Jacob climbed in beside him, clutching his toy truck against the dashboard, Daniel whispered, "This one's for us, son. For new beginnings." The engine roared to life, powerful yet steady. Daniel gripped the wheel and pulled onto the road, Jacob cheering in the passenger seat. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like he was barely surviving. He felt like he was moving forward, carried by something larger than himself. Brotherhood, respect, a reminder that kindness never goes unseen. That night, after Jacob had fallen asleep in his new bed tucked with excitement, Daniel sat quietly on the porch, the truck gleaming in the driveway. His thoughts drifted to Sarah, his late wife, Jacob's mother. She had always told him, "Your strength isn't in what you own, Danny. It's in how you carry yourself when life tries to break you." Her voice echoed now, soft as a memory but sharp as truth. He remembered her last days, how fragile she had looked, yet how fierce her eyes were when she told him to raise their boy with love, not bitterness. He clutched her old locket in his palm, whispering into the night, "Did you see, Sarah? They stood for me. They stood for us." The tears came, but they didn't taste like shame anymore. They were clean, almost freeing. Somewhere deep inside, Daniel felt she was proud, that she had seen him walk through humiliation and come out taller, not smaller. The rumble of distant motorcycles echoed faintly across the town. And in that sound, Daniel felt less alone. A week later, Daniel and Jacob returned to Miller's diner. This time, the morning sun poured through the windows, casting everything in golden light. The familiar bell jingled as they stepped inside, but today Daniel held his head higher. The same waitress, Patty, rushed over with a smile. "Well, look who's back. Pancakes, right?" Jacob giggled. "Extra syrup." They slid into a booth, this time without hesitation. Conversations swirled around them, but Daniel noticed something different. No mocking voices, no smirks. Only nods of recognition from a few locals who had witnessed what happened last time. Then, as if fate aligned, the rider from that morning entered again. His eyes softened when he saw Daniel and Jacob seated proudly. He approached, clapped Daniel's shoulder firmly, and said, "Heard about the truck. Looks good on you." Daniel smiled. It wasn't just the truck. It was what it meant. The rider nodded slowly. "Respect. That's what it meant." Jacob tilted his head curiously. "Respect." Daniel squeezed his son's hand. "Yes, buddy. Respect means people see who you are, and they stand with you. But peace never stays untested." A few days later, Daniel spotted the same three men lingering outside the diner, cigarettes dangling, eyes narrowed. Their swagger had returned, though cracks still showed in their bravado. Daniel's chest tightened, but this time, he didn't lower his gaze. He opened the diner door for Jacob and walked inside, his back straight. The men muttered insults under their breath, but quieter now. The memory of that confrontation still clung to them like smoke. As Daniel and Jacob settled into their booth, the bell rang again. Engines rumbled outside. The angels. They walked in like shadows of thunder. The leader scanned the room. His eyes flicked to Daniel, then to the bullies outside through the glass. His expression never changed, but his presence was enough. The men crushed out their cigarettes and scattered, disappearing into the street. Jacob leaned close, whispering, "Dad, they're gone." Daniel nodded, heart steady. "Because respect doesn't just protect you once, son. It follows you." For the first time, he realized humiliation had turned into dignity, and dignity had turned into strength. That night, Jacob asked to hear a story before bed. Daniel sat on the edge of the mattress, thinking about everything: the diner, the mockery, the angels, the truck. Instead of an old fairy tale, he spoke softly. "Once, there was a man who thought he was weak, but then he learned something. Strength isn't about fists or money. It's about standing tall, even when people try to knock you down. And when you stand tall, sometimes others will stand with you." Jacob's eyes glowed in the dim light. "Like the bikers?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Yes, like them, but also like me. And one day like you." Jacob hugged him tight, whispering, "I'm proud of you, Dad." The words hit harder than any insult, harder than any gift. Daniel's chest swelled, his throat thick. In that moment, he realized the true gift wasn't the truck, or even the protection. It was his son seeing him not as broken, but as strong. For the first time, Daniel's voice carried pride instead of apology. And that was the beginning of his healing. One evening, the low rumble of motorcycles drew Daniel outside. A line of chrome and thunder idled in front of his house. Jacob ran to the porch, eyes wide with awe. The angels had returned. The leader stepped forward, pulling off his sunglasses. His weathered face broke into the faintest smile. "You and your boy busy tonight?" Daniel shook his head, unsure. "Come with us," the leader said. "There's a gathering outside town. Bonfire, music, family, family." The word struck Daniel. He glanced at Jacob, whose face lit up at the idea. "Can we, Dad?" For a moment, fear flickered. What would people think? A single father and his son among bikers? But then Daniel realized respect wasn't about appearances. It was about truth. He nodded. "We'll come." That night, Jacob rode in the new truck with his toy pressed against the window, watching the bikes lead the way. Daniel followed the roar of engines, heart pounding. He wasn't just being invited, he was being welcomed. The clearing outside town glowed with firelight. Dozens of bikes circled around a massive bonfire. Men and women laughed, clapped shoulders, and shared food from battered coolers. When Daniel parked, the angels greeted him with nods. No judgment, no mocking, just respect. Jacob's eyes sparkled at the sight of it all, the flames, the bikes, the leather vests. One biker handed him a small carved wooden toy motorcycle. "For the little man," he said with a grin. Daniel's heart swelled. He hadn't seen his son smile this wide since before Sarah's passing. Later, the leader raised a bottle and spoke. "To fathers who stand tall, to families that never quit, to brotherhood." The group roared in agreement, voices carrying into the night. Daniel sat quietly by the fire, the warmth reaching deeper than his skin. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like an outsider. He didn't feel like a man barely holding it together. He felt like he belonged. As the night wore on, the leader handed Daniel a folded note. "Read this later," he said, eyes steady. Back home, after tucking Jacob into bed, Daniel unfolded the paper with trembling hands. It read, "Respect isn't given for power or wealth. It's given to those who carry love with dignity, no matter how heavy the weight. You showed your son kindness. You showed a stranger kindness. You showed us strength. Remember, respect follows you now. AFFA." Daniel sat back, tears blurring the words. It wasn't just a letter. It was a recognition of everything he had carried in silence. He placed the note inside Sarah's locket, close to her memory, close to his heart. For years, he had thought he was invisible, mocked, forgotten. Now he understood. His quiet resilience had spoken louder than any words, and others had heard it. The next morning, Daniel was woken by the sound of engines outside again. The angels were waiting, their bikes gleaming in the sunrise. Jacob bounded out the door with excitement. "Dad, can we go?" Daniel hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah, son, let's ride." He climbed into the truck, Jacob beside him, and joined the convoy. The road stretched long and open, the dawn painting everything in gold. As they rode, Daniel felt something shift inside. For so long, he had seen himself as small, as the man mocked in a diner. But now, the memory of that humiliation was eclipsed by this moment. Surrounded by respect, carried by brotherhood. Jacob leaned against him, whispering, "Dad, we're part of something." Daniel nodded, eyes on the horizon. "Yes, son, we are." The road roared beneath them, not just pavement but a promise. Weeks later, life was quieter again. The diner was just a diner. The truck was just a truck. But Daniel's heart was different. Every Saturday he still took Jacob for pancakes. Only now he held his head high. No whispers could shake him anymore. His son had seen him stand tall, and that mattered most. Sometimes the angels appeared in town. A nod across the street, a wave from a passing bike. Silent reminders that brotherhood didn't fade. Respect stayed. On one quiet evening, Daniel sat with Jacob watching the sunset. His son leaned against him and whispered, "Dad, I'm proud of you."